In this video, we're going to be discussing the worst zones to level in, taking into account classic and retail era. And at number 10, we have the Thousand Needles. A lot of the quests in this zone are basically fetch quests that the player might see while in low level zones, like killing wildlife until the player gets an item drop, or running to the other side of the map to collect things. Along with the drop chances being low, as all drop chances in vanilla were, it was possible for the player to grind the same mobs for quite a long time and get no drops at all, as the drop rates were around 10 to 25% a mob. On some quests, certain mobs only spawned in 2 locations, making players fight over who got to get the mob. On top of this, there weren't that many quests to do in the zone, and the layout of the area, having to climb the mountains in order to obtain or even turn in quests, could make it a pain to navigate. There were some cool quests though, like killing some of the Grim Totem on top of a mountain, but no other quest really stands out from the rest. The revamping Cataclysm did not help the zone as much, as adding water to the zone did change the way you played it, even giving you a special boat mount for free to use there, but you didn't really need it as they had special transportation that could take you to the main questing hub. There's also a non-insignificant amount of underwater quests, which makes sense seeing as most of the zone is now underwater. But underwater quests have been notoriously unpopular with the player base, regardless of your personal opinions on them or not. Personally, I don't mind underwater quests that much, but any zone that has a large portion of them definitely loses some points in overall player favorability. And at number 9, we have Gorgrond. This is a zone in Draenor and was the second zone players were sent to after finishing Frostfire Ridge for Horde or Shadowwind Valley for Alliance. Compared to the other Warlord zones, Gorgrond offered nothing noteworthy questing-wise. It didn't have important lore like the previous zones did, or at least lore that wasn't ever expanded upon and just forgotten, and most of the quests were fairly generic and enemies that weren't all that interesting. In Warlords of Draenor, they added this new bonus objective system that has quest tasks, like destroy a number of eggs or kill a certain number of Iron Horde, and your reward was a massive amount of experience, and was really the only reason why a lot of players went here, and was done as a way to pad out the zone since it had the least amount of story quests out of all of the Draenor zones. But at least they let you skip the zone faster with all the XP they gave, along with being a very long zone that took a few minutes to traverse, although it could be made a bit better with the Goblin Shredder Garrison campaign upgrade. A number of things were cut from Warlords of Draenor, and Gorgrond seems to have taken the worst of it. For example, the train tracks spanning the zone, which Blizzard originally intended for a train to move through the area as a way for players to get around since flying was not going to be added, even referenced in the Grimwell Depot dungeon, or an entire section of Laughing Skull orcs placed on the edge of the map that acted as nothing more than a resting spot, or the 2 giants fighting that we never saw a conclusion to. Although the reasons that make it not as good as a traditional leveling zone worked in its favor as a speed leveling zone in later expansions. Because there were so many bonus objectives and compared to the other zones, it was a priority zone to hit to level quicker in a lot of expansions that cheesed leveling with XP potions, where what they would do was go around to all of the bonus objectives, complete them until they only had 1 task left to do, then pop the Elixir of the Rapid Mind potion and complete them all as fast as possible. This potion gave you a super high 300% extra experience buff, but it only had a short 15-minute duration, which made it perfect to combo with Gorgrond, and could be enough experience to skip WoD leveling altogether if you added in gathering some treasures afterwards. This combo no longer works as they removed the potion from the game and nerfed XP gains from Warlords of Draenor content across the board. So Gorgrond is back to low tier status once again. And at number 8, we have the Swamp of Sorrows. The reason why this is on this list is for a few notable reasons. The way to get the quest here was somewhat confusing, as once you completed all the quests given in Stonard, the rest were hidden within other encampments, along with no real noteworthy quests, and the zone being difficult to navigate due to level 60 elite dragons flying around, who were able to dismount and kill players within just a few hits. Getting killed resulted in a very long corpse walk time, as like most of vanilla, there was few graveyards, but with the zone being so long, it meant really long death runs. Another part being the massive amounts of rivers within the zone, all of them deep enough to force you to dismount, and also all full of crocodiles, not only dismounting you, but also putting you in combat. One of the more interesting things about the original Swamp of Sorrows was how it had broken Draenei as killable NPCs, which were part of a few quests. The quests themselves are nothing special, but pretty much everything about them was retcon, as they majorly changed the lore involving Draenei with the very next expansion in the Burning Crusade. With its reworking Cataclysm, it got changed a fair bit. While the left half of it only got minor changes, the entire right half got reworked, with far fewer rivers, a few extra towns, and the once lake now directly connected to the ocean in a giant opening for use as a port. Even adding a huge alliance town and an outpost, which is quite funny as before the update, the zone had no major hub for alliance. And at number 7, we have Azshara. Before the Cataclysm revamp, Azshara was a unique zone, seeing as nothing really happened here. It was full of far more dangerous elites than the other zones were, and there were very few quests to do. Zones of Vanilla had different quest numbers depending on if the player was Horde or Alliance, and since Azshara was closer to Horde, if an Alliance player went there was practically nothing for them to do, even less than normal in these kinds of situations. It was a huge and open zone that was unwelcoming to those who decided to venture here, especially as it only had one flight path being on the very far left of the zone, away from literally everything. They might have possibly had other intentions for the zone, but whatever it was, it obviously was not realized. Seeing as many other zones of Vanilla were also lackluster or possibly had very little, such as Silithus for example, it's easy to see they kinda ran out of time with some of them. Azshara was an area that was only really used to do various max level quests, like the entire Molten Core Hydraxian Waterlord questline required to summon Ragnaros, and also used to summon Moz, a giant shark killed to rebuild the Scepter of the Shifting Sands during the opening of Ahn'Qiraj. This zone isn't bad as part of the world per se, but there's just practically no quest or anything interesting here until max level that would allure the player to traveling all the way there. The Cataclysm revamp changed this area quite a lot. For example, the Bilgewater Cartel's goblins have taken over the zone as their new base of operations, changing it from a max level questing area to quite a low level location, and with this added tons of new quests, making it an actual good leveling location. To commemorate their new partnership with the Horde, the Bilgewater goblins carved the landscape into a giant symbol of the Horde, so that anyone who looked upon the map would see the very sigil of the Horde in the land itself above the faction's major city. This transformation landscape was a complete overhaul of the entire zone. Many goblin bases, mines, a rocket roller coaster traveling system, and a giant Gallywix head sitting beside the Pleasure Palace. This zone was changed from a land of ancient ruins untouched by mortal hands into a capitalist wonderland of exploiting the landscape to Party Peninsula. Its Cataclysm version is much better, and it's basically on this list for its pre-Cata iteration. And at number 6, we have Blade's Edge Mountain. This zone is widely regarded in the Burning Crusade community as being the worst possible area to level in for multiple reasons, such as generic and uninteresting quests like go kill 30 ogres, a horrible layout of the area, multiple levels, cliffs, areas separated by long caves full of mobs, and long run-back times as the player died. In the Burning Crusade, when reaching level 68, the player had the opportunity to purchase flying. This was nearly required for some sections of high-level zones, like Netherstorm, Shadowmoon Valley, and of course, Blade's Edge Mountain. Blade's Edge was especially annoying though, as even with flying, all of these areas were separated by massive cliff sides covered in spikes. That meant to get even a short distance in some locations, you had to fly all the way up a cliffside and then down on the other side. On top of this, there were really no standout quests in the zone either. All this was made even worse with the Ogrelot rep being within the zone, one of the most annoying reps of all time to farm, with slow Simon Says and annoying long dailies that gave very little rep. And it didn't even give a mount like many of the other TBC reps did. The only good thing about this area was the endgame questlines around and leading to Gruul's lair. And at number 5, we have Desolace. This was a zone in Kalimdor that was, well, desolate, at least until Cataclysm. The quest sent players across the map to collect items and do the same trivial content that most zones offered, except with no real story outside of a remnant of the Legion and some Centaur rivalries. Most of the quest lines, even the ones involving the Centaur tribes, held really no lore importance, other than having a niche system where you got a faction which gave quests based on which Centaur tribe you killed, which was a really unique method and added more total reps to the game and had a big RPG moment vibes for it, but unfortunately led to literally nothing rep-wise, other than dictating which quests you got to do for basically the same rewards. Visually speaking, it was all the same color of gray and had the infamous Bone Collector quest. This quest would require the player to go around and collect Kodo bones. The annoying part of this was that sometimes when interacting with these bones, a Kodo apparition would spawn at level 39 and hit very hard, killing most players in the process, as this zone was meant for players who had just turned level 30. This quest itself being available at level 33, but recommended for players of 37, which even then was low. Desolace was filled with quests that required players to go to the other side of the map and kill some centaurs, then travel all the way back, receive a similar quest to the one they just did, then travel all the way back to the same spot and do it again. This zone was very similar to most other vanilla zones in which it required the player to constantly go from A to B, then back to A again, and do meaningless things. This zone, like most, did get revamped during the Cataclysm expansion. It made Desolace not as desolate. Deathwing shattering collapsed cliff sides and crumbled mountains, causing some zones, like the Thousand Needles and Durotar, to be flooded with water. However, Desolace was luckily spared, as it connected directly to the ocean, the land cracking apart causing the rivers of ocean water to find their way through the zone, bringing more life to the area with the help of the druids of the Cenarian Circle, along with some other changes, like the Centaur clans being wiped out and the Naga taking over more of the coastline, as the coastline itself extended further into the land. And at number 4, we have the Arathi Highlands. In Classic, after around level 20 to 25, Blizzard didn't have a direction for players to really go to level up, seeing as Vanilla wasn't finished when it was launched. And because of this, it left the player to find their own path around the world with very little sense of direction. Arathi Highlands was looking like a good spot as it's right next to the wetlands, but its zone balance left a lot to be desired. The zone contained mobs far outleveling that of the player, which roamed around the spots that players needed to quest in. Before the release of Burning Crusade, Stromgarde was full of elite fleeing humanoids, warlocks with pets, and invisible rogues, making questing there for low levels nearly impossible. Along with the minefield of mobs being clumped together, pulling more than one at a time was almost a certain death sentence, as per vanilla leveling zones. And with the caves the players was constantly sent to that were filled with ogres and kobolds, dying was going to happen unless you took extreme caution. Having long run-back times was per usual, seeing as there was only one graveyard. The area was rich in mining nodes, and because of this, it was a popular spot to gather minerals for leveling, crafting, and selling. The zone had way less quests than other zones at the mid-level range, which was kind of standoutish, as zones lacking numerous quests weren't a common thing until zones met for level 50 and above. And this was a level 30 to 40 level range zone. The revamp in Cataclysm didn't change much in the zone either, besides a new Forsaken camp next to Thoradin's Wall, some new NPCs scattered around the area, and some small visual changes. The only other change worth noting was a tunnel that allowed players to be able to travel to the hinterlands, although it did get an overhaul in BFA when it became a warfront, and even being filled with various rares and world quests. It was most likely chosen because no one really cared much if the zone was revamped again. And at number 3, we have Vashj'ir. This zone is probably expected on this list, seeing as underwater combat is not Blizzard's strong suit. You see, Vashj'ir was a beta of sorts for Blizzard testing an underwater expansion, and eventually an underwater raid. This, however, didn't go over well with the community at large, and people use Vashj'ir as the benchmark of not wanting any more underwater combat, even if personally, I really enjoyed the zone. Underwater and even air combat doesn't work well with WoW's combat systems. Examples being abilities like Charge just won't work sometimes, and other times will just send you rocketing to the ground below you, then forward a little bit, then rocketing back up to your target. And of course, AoE location abilities not being able to work in 3D spaces. There's a reason WoW is really designed around being a 2D game, and it's rare we ever fight things in the third dimension of up or down. And when we do, it's usually very annoying. Along with trained underwater combat, the zone was filled with quests that had far travel distances to collect, explore, or kill mobs. The zone does give a unique seahorse mount called the Vashj'ir Seahorse that was very fast, but this mount was zone restricted, meaning you can't even use it unless you're inside the zone of Vashj'ir. With this mount being obtained fairly early within the questline for Vashj'ir, and with less than half of the player base even owning it, it's fair to say that players abandoned their desire to quest here early on. There were even some very unique things in the zone, like the Leviathans who acted as buildings, or the whale shark bosses that floated around the zones. They were very popular to attack during Cataclysm, as they became a popular idea of possible secret loot tables, since they were so hard to kill. If Blizzard had decreased the questing distance or even just reduced the size of the zone, it would have been far better, because visually speaking this is an amazing zone, but players didn't want to deal with the hassle and just went to the better alternative, Mount Hyjal, instead. Especially as this zone had massive amounts of cut content within it, something we go over in our cut content Cataclysm video, only really being out by Uldum. And at number 2, we have the Crystalsong Forest. This zone was found underneath the Wrath of the Lich King's major hub, Dalaran. Crystalsong was actually abandoned in the beta for Wrath of the Lich King after the developers found out that Dalaran lagged the entire zone, as having so many players all focus in a major city was somewhat manageable, but then adding tons of players questing within the zone, and suddenly the game begins to hit a standstill. So the few quests that were offered here were nothing like those of other zones in both quality and quantity. And in fact, the few quests that are available here, that act like traditional zone quests, are technically Icecrown quests. Because of the abandonment by Blizzard, the zone had no real important moments, no overarching story, or even quests at all, which sucks because the zone itself is stunning with the shattered crystalline trees. Meaning this is likely the only zone in the entire expansion you could skip without missing any real lore, as many players did because only a couple of Icecrown quests even sent you here. Funny enough, Crystalsong Forest was listed as a 77 to 80 level zone before the squish, which is odd since it doesn't have any of its own quests, and I assume the only reason it had a levels adjustment at all was because of its few Icecrown quests. Although Crystalsong Forest wasn't the only quote-unquote leveling zone that had no quest in it. The next spot on this list also shared that distinction, but at least the next spot was eventually given quest and turned into a proper leveling zone. It's just it was done kinda poorly. And lastly, at number 1, we have Silithus. When you ask vanilla players what zone they're the most nostalgic for, or have the most memories of, you might hear Silithus a lot. But why is that? The zone was a PvP hotspot in the main hub of the opening of the Encourage event, while also holding AQ20 and AQ40, which had us fighting our first old god. Outside of those things, this zone was just unfinished and left by Blizzard, at launch only having a couple of quests. Very similar to the Crystalsong Forest, where it only had a handful of quests that sent you there, but there were no quests that started there. Silithus was one of the final areas in the game in which close to max level players would end up if they chose to level in Tanaris or Ungoro. They would usually find themselves naturally coming to the zone to see what was up. Along with that, some of the mobs in the zone didn't drop any loot, and nearly all of the mobs were elite. Later on down Vanilla WoW's lifespan in patch 1.8, Blizzard finally added a town and more quests into the game which improved the zone a lot, making it a viable place to get at least one level, which was a fair bit in the final levels. Pairing that with the fact that there was tons of quests and gear to go along with the AQ raids, the zone became extremely important and quite packed. When Cataclysm revamped the zones, Silithus was, for some reason, one of the zones that remained unchanged. In fact, there was a portal that was added leading players to the Blasted Lands, as if Blizzard themselves were saying, don't level here. Although, joking aside, it was nice to have a portal to the Blasted Lands for when you reach 58. The quests that were offered here required the player to dive into caves and clear out tons of Silithid, some with elites that were very powerful. Combined with this, and the quests themselves awarding very little experience, the zone is not worth the player's time or energy, where there are just much better zones you can go to instead. This is unless the rep it gave to you was important, which for most it was. So while the zone was worst by far pre 1.8, it then became the worst, but not by much at least. Although it seems even Blizzard agreed this zone was the worst because come the end of Legion, they had Sargeras stab the place, completely glassing the entire zone except for a few minor locations at the very edge. And of course the AQ raid itself, leaving in its wake a massive sword that towers the sky, and is visible from many zones away. A great ending to a horrible zone. Now before we end this, there's one very interesting thing to talk about with Silithus. In patch 1.8, they added a fair new things that we mentioned before, but it also finally gave it a full-fledged map, as originally this was the zone's map. Notice anything odd? Encourage is an explorable area part of the zone. The gates were locked, so we couldn't go over there, but of course there was stuff back there. But basically, it was just an open desert with some random old god structures within. Nothing special. What was special, however, was the fact that this was an explorable area on the map, meaning it may have originally been planned to be an entire section of the zone on its own, eventually unlocked and filled with max level quests to collect rep, gear, and more with the raids within. However, in 1.8, the entire section was removed from the map, as the raids themselves simply became entries at the bottom of Silithus. It may be because they had simply accounted for the raid's physical space in the world on the map. It may have been planned as a max level rep grinding zone. It may have had plans as leveling content. Whatever the plans, it was all cut. The devs have yet to comment on this, so we may never really know what the original plan was.